Southside, Southside, Southside for kids. Hey there, welcome to Southside United Time for Kids. Great to see you. Great to be with you on this special week, Holy Week. Meet on special land that God created. The Yaga and the Turrbal people have cared for this land. So we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Let's say our prayer together. Ready? From the top of my head to the tips of my toes, from the lobes of my ears to the end of my nose, from my back to my front to my wiggly fingers. God loves me, yay! We're going to have a special Southside today. We're not going to have a song, but we're going to move straight into our story. It's going to help us to hear the story of what Jesus did on this special Holy Week. This is a map of Jerusalem. It was at the time of Jesus. Even then, it was a very old city. We don't know when it was first built, but it's now well over 3,000 years old, and it's a pilgrimage site for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. About 1,000 years before Jesus was born, David captured the city from the Jebusites and made it his own. It was his son, Solomon, who built the first temple. The temple was burnt down when the Babylonians came. They took many of the people who lived in the city off into exile. And when they returned, they rebuilt the temple. And the temple was rebuilt again by King Herod. It was finished at the time of Jesus. These are the walls. This is the temple. This is the upper room. Well, as much as we can tell after so many centuries. This is the Roman fortress of Antonia. This is the palace of Herod. This is the palace of the high priest, Caiaphas. The Kidron Valley ran down the east side of the city. The Mount of Olives. Some say that there was a bridge that crossed the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem. Others aren't so sure. But this is where the Garden of Gethsemane was and still is today. This is Golgotha, the place of the skull. Jesus came to Jerusalem a number of times. As a baby, as a young boy. Once, Mother Mary and Father Joseph found Jesus in the temple talking with the priests. This is the story of what happened on Jesus' final visit to Jerusalem. Jesus and his followers journeyed down from Galilee along the winding Jordan River. And when they got to Jericho, Jesus healed blind Bartimaeus. And he ate with Zacchaeus. And then they left Jericho and crossed the low desert and then started to climb up the mountains, up towards the city. And perhaps on the Sabbath, they stayed in Bethany to rest. And on the Sunday, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples ahead to borrow a donkey. And Jesus rode the donkey into Jerusalem. They followed the path down through the Kidron Valley, then up, probably down through the southern gate and up into the city, through the old city. And people saw them travelling and they got excited. Could this be the Messiah? And some people chopped down branches of palms and waved them. And others put their coats down. And so they entered the city. And they travelled up and got to a large, flat area. Maybe that's where they left the donkey. And then they went into the temple. Perhaps they went in at the double gate. Or perhaps they climbed the steps up into the temple courtyard. But they didn't go through the triple gate, for that was the gate, especially for priests. And when they got in, they found a large courtyard. And they crossed that into the temple to pray. And after the prayers, they travelled back out of the city and across to the Mount of Olives to spend the night. On the Monday, Jesus headed back in to Jerusalem. And perhaps they ended up through the steps and Jesus taught, probably in the southwest corner where the other rabbis would teach and people came to listen. And then they travelled back out of the city, back to the Mount of Olives. On the Tuesday, Jesus again and his followers again went into the city and up to the temple. Perhaps they climbed the steps up and got into the royal portico, into the courtyard of the Gentiles. And there Jesus got angry because he looked around and there were people changing money and selling animals for sacrifice. And Jesus got angry. And he turned over the tables and he upset the people selling doves and other animals. And he was upset at how they turned into a marketplace, this holy place. And the leaders were not happy. And Jesus and his followers headed back out across the valley, and perhaps to Bethany to sleep. On the Wednesday, they entered the city again to the temple. And the crowds grew to listen to Jesus and hear, and the guards became nervous and thought they should arrest Jesus. But they didn't. And so that evening, Jesus and his followers headed out. And perhaps that evening, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives looking back over Jerusalem with Peter and Andrew and James and John. and talked to them privately, and they asked what was going to happen. Well, on the Thursday, the guards were ready to arrest Jesus, but he didn't appear in the temple. And his followers asked where should they share the Passover meal. And he told them, go into the city and follow a man with a water jar, and he will lead you to where you need to go. And that evening, Jesus and his followers headed into Jerusalem. And they went to the house that had been prepared. And they climbed the steps up into the upper room. And there they shared the Last Supper. And when everyone had eaten all that they needed, Jesus shared with them the bread and the wine. And said to them, do this to remember me. And they weren't sure what he was talking about, but they would always remember. And Jesus told them to love one another. And he showed them how to care for each other by washing their feet. And after this, Judas left the room and went out into the darkness of the city. And the rest of them left, and they went back across to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus went to pray while the others fell asleep. And when Jesus had finished praying, the temple guards came out of the dark and they arrested him. And Judas showed them who he was. And Jesus was taken back into the city and made their way to the palace, home of Caiaphas, the high priest. And there they asked Jesus lots of questions, but Jesus would not answer. And eventually Caiaphas tore his coat and said, "Blasphemy!" And they arrested Jesus for saying that he was God. And perhaps Jesus was taken off then by the temple guards to the Roman fortress of Anatolia. And on Friday morning, Jesus was taken to the Roman governor, Pilate. And Pilate asked him lots of questions. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You say I am." But he would say nothing else. Pilate sent Jesus off to Herod. He was one of the sons of Herod the Great, who built the temple and had died about 34 years before. When Herod was sick of Jesus, he sent him back to Pilate. Now there was a tradition at the time that one prisoner would be released. And so Pilate said to the crowd, "Do you want me to release Jesus or Barabbas?" And the crowd cried out, "Barabbas." So Jesus was prepared to be executed. And they took him out to Golgotha, the place of the skull. And there they put him on the cross. And there Jesus died for us. People still walk this path from a school now, where the fortress used to be, along the Via Dolorosa, the street of sadness, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They remember that journey of Jesus. After Jesus had died, his friends took his body and placed it in a tomb nearby, which was given by Joseph of Arimathea. On Saturday, there was silence. On Sunday, some of the women got up and were brave and wanted to go to the tomb to be with Jesus. But when they got there, they found that the stone had been rolled away and that Jesus was alive, just as he is today. I wonder what part of this story you like the best. Have a chat those who are watching. Pause it and have a chat. I wonder which part is most important. Have a chat. I wonder where you might be in the story, or what part of the story might be about you. I wonder if there's any part of this story that we could leave out and still have all the story that we need. I wonder what our church might do to celebrate these different parts of the story. I wonder if there's anything that you as a family might do to celebrate this special Holy Week. Well, I hope you might join with us for some of our activities. Maundy Thursday at 6 p.m. at Mount Gravatt. Good Friday, 8 a.m. here at Tarragindi. On Saturday, there's a reflective space here from 9 till 12. And then join us on Easter Sunday at Yeronga at 9 o'clock as we celebrate the wonderful news that Jesus is risen. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Bye, everyone.